The brand on her skin was a constant searing reminder that she was property, a thing to be owned and discarded. But the secret life fluttering within her womb was a rebellion she hadn't chosen, a terrifying sacred truth in the heart of a dying kingdom. Every stone Ilara hauled to mend the crumbling walls of Eriador was a penance for a crime she didn't commit, her existence a silent apology. The child, her child, would be born into this same bondage, another asset for a crown that had already taken everything from her. This crushing reality was a cage built of despair and silence, a feeling of being trapped that perhaps resonates far beyond these blighted lands. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, what time it is in your part of the world, and please subscribe to the channel, because some prisons are made of stone and others are forged from the circumstances we are forced to endure. Her world was a monotonous cycle of grueling labor under a perpetually grey sky. The magical blight that choked Eriador was more than a political problem. It was a physical presence. It withered the ancient silver-barked trees to skeletal husks and left a film of bitter dust on every surface, a taste of decay on the tongue. Ilara worked alongside other slaves, their faces hollowed by exhaustion and hopelessness, their spirits as broken as the kingdom they served. She felt a profound isolation, a ghost among ghosts, invisible to the elegant, long-lived elves who passed her without a glance, their faces masks of cold indifference. Her only companion was the secret rhythm of a second heartbeat within her, a tiny, defiant drumbeat against the overwhelming silence of her life, promising a future that was both her greatest fear and her only reason to survive another day. High King Theron stood on the highest battlement, the cold wind whipping his silver hair and tugging at the heavy ermine of his cloak. He was the master of this fading realm, a ruler whose centuries of life had become a monument to failure. The blight was in his bloodline, a curse that had rendered his people sterile and his kingdom brittle. From this vantage point, he could see the encroaching, unnaturally dark forests where the Lycan clans grew bolder, demanding a treaty sealed by a marriage his xenophobic council would never permit. His throne was a gilded cage, his immense power a cruel joke against the creeping silence of empty nurseries and the slow, inevitable death of his civilization. He was a king of ashes, presiding over a magnificent tomb, his heart as barren as the land he governed. His inspection of the outer walls was a familiar ritual of impotence, a survey of decay he could not halt. His gaze, weary and ancient, drifted from the crumbling masonry to the laborers toiling below. It was then that he saw her, a human slave, her form made heavy with a child, a stark, impossible symbol of life amidst the pervasive sterility of his world. Compelled by an impulse he didn't understand, Theron descended, his royal guards moving in a silent, protective phalanx. He stopped before her, the air crackling with tension. His voice was quiet, a detached inquiry about her welfare, her quarters. Ilara, frozen in terror, could only speak the raw truth. She had no quarters, no shelter, no home at all. In that moment, her exhausted, defiant eyes became a mirror, and in them, Theron saw the reflection of his own profound neglect, a rot festering at the very heart of his kingdom. The encounter left Ilara trembling, a target for both whispers and cold stares from the other slaves. She had spoken to the king, a transgression that defied the unwritten laws of her servitude. She spent the rest of the day expecting a lash or worse, her every nerve screaming with a mixture of fear and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of something else, the shock of being seen. As dusk settled, casting long skeletal shadows across the courtyard, she retreated to her usual, miserable spot, a small alcove barely shielded from the wind. Curling into herself, one hand protectively covering her belly, she tried to disappear, but the heavy, rhythmic tread of armored boots stopped directly in front of her. A royal guardsman, his face an unreadable mask in the flickering torchlight, loomed over her. He held out a scroll, sealed with the unmistakable crest of the High King. The world she knew was about to end. The royal scroll felt heavier than any stone she had ever lifted, its crisp parchment a stark contrast to the grime under her fingernails. The king's seal, a swirling silver tree, seemed to burn in the dim torchlight, a brand of a different sort, yet just as terrifying. It dredged up a ghost from her past. The memory of another official document, a debt bond signed with her father's shaky hand. He had been a man who chased phantom fortunes in smoky taverns, and she was his final, discarded wager. She remembered the hollow space in his eyes as he traded her for a handful of coins, a look not of malice, but of complete soul-crushing absence. He had not said goodbye. That moment of abandonment was the cornerstone of her existence, the first and deepest lesson that she was an object, a thing to be bartered and forgotten. This summons felt chillingly familiar, another powerful man poised to decide her fate without a single thought for the life he was about to break. Before the brand, before the endless labor, there had been a life. It was a fragile, flickering memory she rarely dared to touch, for fear it would disintegrate completely. A small cottage with a leaky roof, the earthy scent of her mother's herb garden after a spring rain, and the comforting rhythm of the loom where her mother wove stories into thread. They were poor, but their world was contained, safe, and filled with a quiet love that felt as real as the sun on her skin. Her name, Ilara, was spoken then with tenderness, a sound she could no longer recognize. The magical blight was just a distant rumor from the capital, a problem for kings and elves, not for a girl who knew the secret paths through the woods and the best places to find wild berries. That stolen warmth was now a constant, aching chill in her bones, a testament to a world and a self that had been utterly and irrevocably lost. The wound left by her father's betrayal was torn open by the one person who had promised to heal it. Kyle, a stonemason's apprentice with dust in his hair and kindness in his smile, had sworn he would protect her. In stolen moments behind the village granary, they had built a future out of whispered words and tentative touches, a fragile dream of a life far from the shadow of her father's failures. But when the slaver's wagon rumbled into the square, his promises turned to dust. He stood in the crowd, his face a mask of pale, paralyzed fear, and he did nothing. She met his eyes and saw not love, but a cold, desperate calculation for his own survival. In that silent, agonizing instant, her belief in salvation, in the strength of another's heart, was shattered. It taught her the most brutal truth of her world. Everyone is alone, and love is a luxury the desperate cannot afford. That bitter lesson was why the secret life inside her was both a miracle and a curse. This child was not the product of love, but of a shared, fleeting moment of humanity with another slave, a desperate attempt to feel something other than cold and exhaustion in the dark. He was gone the next day, sold to a quarry in the north, and she was left with the consequence, a tiny, fluttering heartbeat that was both her only anchor and her heaviest chain. To love this child was to invite a pain she could not bear, to dream, for it was a form of madness. Romance was a fairy tale told to children in a world that had not yet shown its teeth. Her heart was not empty. It was a fortress, and every beat was dedicated to guarding the impossible, terrifying secret nestled beneath it, a duty that left no room for anything or anyone else. The royal guard did not speak, his silence a heavy, intimidating presence. He simply waited, a statue of polished steel and leather, until she shakily rose to her feet, clutching the scroll as if it were a talisman. He led her away from the familiar misery of the outer workyards, through archways that grew progressively grander and more ornate. The rough, functional stone of the slave quarters gave way to the ethereal, white marble of the elven citadel, its spires so slender and elegant they seemed to scrape the stars from the night sky. The air itself changed, the pervasive scent of dust and decay replaced by the clean, sharp fragrance of ancient magic and night-blooming flowers. It was a world of breathtaking, intimidating beauty, a realm she had only ever glimpsed from afar, and she felt like a stray dog wandering into a king's pristine temple, her very presence a desecration. As they passed through silent, gilded corridors, elven sentinels stood guard, their tall, slender forms impossibly still. Their ancient, otherworldly eyes followed her, and in their gaze she felt not overt hostility, but something far more chilling, a profound and absolute indifference. To them, she was not a woman, not even a person, but a piece of property that was out of place, a smudge of dirt on a flawless tapestry. The chasm between their existences was palpable. They were beings of grace, power, and near immortality, while she was a short-lived human, branded and broken. A wave of hot, suffocating shame washed over her, and she instinctively pulled her ragged cloak tighter, a futile attempt to hide her filth, her humanity, her very self from their sight. Every step deeper into the heart of their world was a fresh reminder that she did not and could never belong. Finally, the guard halted before a set of towering doors, carved from the heartwood of a silver-barked tree, the grain glowing with a soft, internal light. He did not knock. With a whisper of displaced air, the doors swung inward of their own accord, revealing the chamber beyond. The guard gestured for her to enter, and then receded into the shadows of the hall, abandoning her on the threshold. She stepped into a vast, circular room, its ceiling a dome of enchanted crystal that revealed the star-dusted cosmos above. In the center, silhouetted against a hearth of smokeless silver fire, stood High King Theron. He turned slowly to face her, his expression a mask of regal neutrality. The great doors swung shut behind her with a soft, resonant thud, the sound of a key turning in a lock. She was alone, trapped with the most powerful being in the kingdom, the chilling silence broken only by the frantic pounding of her own heart. Theron was not what she expected. He was not a figure of brute force, but of immense, crushing stillness. Taller than any human, with a lean, powerful frame honed by centuries of command, he stood with a posture that spoke of absolute authority. His silver hair, long and unbound, caught the light of the ethereal fire, and his face was a masterpiece of harsh, elegant lines, beautiful but unforgiving. Yet it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of a winter sky, ancient and filled with a profound, soul-deep weariness that seemed at odds with the sheer power radiating from him. In his presence, the vast, star-domed chamber felt small, the air thin and charged with a silent, waiting energy. He was the heart of this dying kingdom, and Elara could feel the slow, tired beat of its decay emanating directly from him. "You are an anomaly," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in her bones, devoid of warmth, yet not overtly cruel. It was the voice of a being who had long since moved past simple emotions into a realm of pure, calculated necessity. He gestured to a single unadorned chair before the hearth, a clear, unspoken command. "In a world that is fading into dust, you are teeming with life. My people, the elves of Eridor, have not seen a child born within these walls in over a century. The blight that poisons our lands has seeped into our very blood, a curse of sterility that promises a slow, silent extinction. We are a magnificent hollow tree, waiting for the final wind to push us over. Every day I watch my kingdom shrink, my people grow older, and my legacy turn to ash. He turned from her then, his gaze fixed on the swirling cosmos visible through the crystalline ceiling, a universe of infinite life that mocked his finite world. The regal mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a glimpse of the crushing isolation beneath. I have ruled for 500 years. I have watched friends, advisors, and would-be queens wither and fade while I remain. This throne is not a seat of power. It is a monument to my failure, a gilded prison cell where I am the sole, immortal inmate. My council bickers over tradition and blood purity, blind to the fact that the blood they seek to protect is running dry. They would rather our entire civilization vanish than compromise, than adapt. Their pride is a shroud they are weaving for us all, and they expect me to wear it with dignity as I lead them into oblivion. His winter-grey eyes found hers again, and the intensity in them was a physical force, pinning her in place. The Lycan clans to the north grow bolder. They see our weakness, and their alpha demands a treaty sealed by marriage. He would give me an heir, but it would be a surrender, a dilution of our essence my court would never tolerate. It would spark a civil war I cannot afford to fight. They offer one impossible choice, my counsel another, and then I saw you. He took a step closer, the scent of cold stone and ancient magic clinging to him. A human, a slave, carrying a child that is a biological impossibility for my entire race. You are a symbol, a miracle, a potential lie that is more powerful than any truth I currently possess. You represent a third path, a desperate, unthinkable gambit in a game I am destined to lose. The High King stopped directly before her, a towering monolith of silver and shadow. The sheer difference in their stations was a chasm between them, a dizzying void of power and powerlessness. "This is my proposition," he stated, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "I will erase your brand. I will annul your slave bond. I will give you a title, gowns of silk, a place of honor and safety. Your child will want for nothing. They will be raised not as a slave's bastard, but as a prince or princess of Eridor, my heir, the future of this kingdom. I will claim you as my high queen, and your child as my own blood. In return, you will play the part. You will be my devoted wife in public, a symbol of renewed hope, and the mother of the miracle that will silence my enemies and give my people a reason to fight for survival." Ilara's breath hitched, her mind unable to process the sheer audacity of his words. It was not an offer of freedom, it was a demand for her entire being, an exchange of one form of bondage for another, infinitely more complex and terrifying. She would be a gilded puppet, her life a performance, her child a political tool. The fear that had been a cold knot in her stomach now exploded, a blinding panic that stole the air from her lungs. She looked into the ancient, weary eyes of the Elven King and saw no room for choice, no mercy, only the stark, cold calculus of a desperate ruler willing to sacrifice any piece on the board to save his game. He had seen her not as a woman, but as a solution. And in his world, solutions were not asked, they were commanded. The king's words hung in the air, a proposal so monstrously impossible that Ilara's mind refused to grasp them. High Queen, her, a branded slave, clad in rags and smelling of dust and sweat, to be the queen of the ethereal ancient elves. And her, child, the secret nameless flutter in her womb, to be their heir. The room seemed to tilt, the star-dusted ceiling swirling into a dizzying vortex. She stared at Theron, at the harsh, beautiful lines of his face, searching for the cruel jest, the hidden mockery. But his winter-grey eyes held only a stark, unnerving seriousness. This wasn't a dream or a nightmare, it was a transaction. He was offering to trade her iron shackles for golden ones, and the price was her life, her body, her child, her. very identity. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, a silent testament to the chasm between his world and hers, a chasm he was proposing to bridge with a lie. Theron paced before the silver fire, his movements fluid and controlled, the embodiment of centuries of command. He did not seem to require her immediate answer. He was simply laying out the terms of a reality he had already decided upon. My council is a nest of vipers, clinging to traditions that are strangling us, he explained, his voice a low, dispassionate murmur. They would rather see our bloodline end in a blaze of glorious, pointless purity than accept an alliance with the Lycans. They whisper of ancient prophecies and the sanctity of our race, all while our nurseries remain silent and our magic fades. They cannot see the slow, creeping death at our gates, but they will see a child, an elven heir. It is a symbol they cannot deny, a miracle they will be forced to accept. Your child will be the story that saves this kingdom from its own pride. He was not asking for her help. He was explaining her function. A raw, desperate sound escaped Ilara's lips, half laugh, half sob. "They will never believe you," she whispered, the words scraping her throat. She finally found the strength to meet his gaze, her own eyes wide with a terror that was slowly being sharpened into disbelief. "Look at me. I am human. I am branded. I am filth from your work yards. They will take one look at me and know. They will tear me apart before I ever reach your throne." Her voice cracked on the last word. Every ounce of her being screamed that this was a death sentence. She was a field mouse being asked to masquerade as a lioness in a den of wolves. The humiliation, the scrutiny, the inevitable violent discovery, it was a future more terrifying than a lifetime of hauling stones under a whip. Her past had taught her that visibility was danger, and he was offering her the most visible position in the entire world. "Your obscurity is your greatest asset," Theron countered, his tone cutting through her panic with chilling precision. "You have no family to question your origins, no history that can be traced. You are a blank parchment upon which I can write any story I choose. I will say I found you in a hidden valley, the last of a forgotten line of humans touched by ancient magic, a lineage compatible with my own. I will forge documents, create a history, and my word is law. My council's belief is irrelevant. Their obedience is not." He stopped his pacing and turned to face her fully, his presence an overwhelming force. "They will not tear you apart because they will be tearing apart their king's chosen queen and the mother of their future ruler. I will protect your body. It is your mind you must guard. You need only play the part I give you." He then softened his voice, a subtle, calculated shift in tactics. He began to paint a picture, not of political necessity, but of personal salvation. "Your brand will be gone. Your name will be spoken with reverence. You will sleep in soft linens, not on cold stone. You will eat until you are full. Your child," he said, his gaze dropping for a fleeting moment to her belly, "will have tutors, protectors, the finest clothes, the most skilled healers. They will never know a moment of hunger, a moment of fear, a moment of worthlessness. They will be loved not just by you, but by an entire kingdom desperate for their existence. I am not offering you a crown. I am offering your child a world, the world you dream of for them, the one you know you can never provide. I am offering them a life." It was a brutal, undeniable truth, a lure baited with her deepest, most secret desires. The choice became a physical weight inside her, pressing down on her lungs, making it hard to breathe. One path led to a familiar, certain misery for her and her child, a life as property, disposable and forgotten. The other was a terrifying leap into the unknown, a life of gilded lies where a single misstep could lead to an unimaginable death for them both. She thought of the child, this tiny, innocent life that depended completely on her. Could she condemn it to her own fate out of fear? Or could she risk everything, even her own soul, for the chance, however slim, that it could have a future? The image of her child, grown and strong, wearing the sigil of the royal house instead of a slave's brand, was a vision of blinding, seductive power. It was a future purchased with her own terror, a sacrifice a mother was meant to make. Her gaze lifted to meet Theron's once more. In the depths of his ancient, weary eyes, she saw not a tyrant, but a fellow prisoner. He was as trapped by his crown, his legacy, and his dying people as she was by her slave bond. They were two desperate creatures on opposite ends of the world's spectrum, reaching for the same thing: survival. A strange, fleeting sense of kinship passed between them, a shared understanding of utter desperation. In that moment, she was not just a solution to his problem, she was a partner in a shared, impossible gamble. This realization did not lessen her fear, but it gave it shape. It gave her a flicker of agency. She was not merely being commanded, she was being asked to enter into an alliance, and an alliance had terms. A lifetime of enduring had forged a core of steel within her, and now, for the first time, she chose to wield it. She pushed herself to her feet, her movements slow but steady, a queen in rags claiming her own power in the heart of her captor's sanctum. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the vast, silent chamber. The faintest hint of relief softened the hard lines of Theron's face, a crack in his marble facade. But she was not finished. She took a step closer, her chin held high, her eyes locking with his. "On one condition," she continued, her voice dropping to a low, determined tone that held no room for negotiation. "You will make me your queen, but you will never be my king. This is a pact, not a marriage, and my child will have your name, but they will answer to my heart." The ceremony was not a celebration of union, but a stark declaration of political will, held within the cold, echoing expanse of the throne room. There were no flowers, no music, only the silent, judgmental presence of Theron's High Council, their long, elegant forms arranged like statues of disapproval. Elara was a ghost in borrowed finery, a gown of shimmering silver silk that felt alien against her skin, its weight a constant reminder of the golden cage being built around her. The brand on her back, though magically healed and faded to a faint silver scar, seemed to itch with phantom fire, a secret insult beneath the luxurious fabric. She walked on a runner of deep blue velvet, each step taking her further from the woman she had been and closer to the lie she was forced to become. The air was thin and frigid, smelling of polished marble and the ancient, sterile magic that permeated the citadel, a world where she was the only living, breathing contaminant. Lord Valerius, the most ancient and influential member of the council, watched her approach with an expression of undisguised contempt. His eyes, the color of chips of ice, raked over her human form, cataloguing every perceived flaw, her stature, the curve of her belly, the mortal fragility in her gaze. In his stare, Elara saw the embodiment of all, her fears. To these beings, she was not just an outsider. She was a blight, a symptom of their king's desperation and madness. She felt a wave of suffocating shame, a desire to shrink into herself, to disappear. But then she felt a faint, fluttering movement within her, a tiny, insistent reminder of the life she was protecting. That secret strength was her only armor. She lifted her chin, meeting the council's collective hatred not with defiance, but with the quiet, unyielding endurance of a survivor about to walk into the heart of the fire. Theron stood before the twin thrones of Eredor, a monolith of silver and shadow. He was not a groom awaiting his bride, he was a monarch sealing a critical, dangerous treaty. His face was a mask of regal indifference, but Ilara could see the faint tension in the line of his jaw, the absolute focus in his winter-grey eyes as they swept over his council, silently daring any one of them to object. He radiated an aura of immense, contained power, a force that bent the very atmosphere of the room around him. As she came to a stop before him, he did not offer a smile or a comforting glance. His gaze met hers, and it was a look of shared purpose, a silent acknowledgement of the perilous game they were now forced to play together. In that moment, they were not man and woman, but co-conspirators, bound by a lie that could save or shatter their world. An elven priest, his robes the color of aged parchment, began the rite in a dry, emotionless monotone. The words spoken were not of love or devotion, but of lineage, duty, and succession. It was the public forging of a legal chain, each ancient phrase another link binding her to him, binding her child to his crown. When it was her turn to speak the oath, her voice was a fragile whisper, nearly lost in the vastness of the hall. In stark contrast, Theron's response was a resonant declaration, his voice ringing with absolute authority, each word a hammer blow of law that left no room for doubt or dissent. He was not just taking a wife, he was proclaiming a new reality, daring the world to challenge him. It was a performance of power, and she was the central, silent prop in his masterful stage play. As the final words of the binding oath faded into the oppressive silence, Theron was required to perform the gesture of union, the public kiss. He turned to her, his movements economical and precise. He was a king fulfilling a duty, nothing more. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. The contact was a shock, a sudden searing point of warmth in the frozen landscape of the ceremony. It was not a kiss of passion, but it was not entirely cold either. It was a statement of ownership, a brand of a different kind, yet for a fraction of a second. As he drew back, his ancient eyes held a flicker of something unreadable, a momentary disruption in his perfect control. It was as if he had touched not just a slave, but a woman, and the unexpected reality of it had caught him off guard. In that fleeting, silent moment after the kiss, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, the touch of his lips still a tingling ghost on her own. She saw it clearly in his gaze before the mask of indifference slammed back down. A brief, unguarded flicker of surprise, of something he hadn't anticipated. It was the first crack in their carefully constructed arrangement, the first sign that this pact of pure convenience might be compromised by something as volatile and unpredictable as a simple human touch. The council watched, their faces grim, but they had seen what they were meant to see, the sealing of the pact. They had missed the real event, the silent, accidental spark of a connection that was infinitely more dangerous than any political maneuvering. It was a secret that now existed only between the two of them. Theron took her hand, his fingers cool and strong, closing around hers in a grip that was both protective and possessive. The contrast was jarring. His skin was smooth and unyielding, like that of a statue, while hers was still rough from a lifetime of labor, a testament to the chasm between their worlds that no ceremony could truly bridge. He led her from the dais, down the velvet runner, and past the silent, hostile rows of his court. The walk was a gauntlet of pure hatred. She could feel their eyes on her back, a physical weight of animosity that threatened to crush her. She kept her gaze fixed forward, focusing on the unyielding strength of the hand holding hers. He was her shield, but he was also her warden, leading her from one prison and into the gilded, suffocating confines of another. The silence was a declaration of war. They moved through the silent, ornate corridors of the citadel, their footsteps the only sound in the vast, empty halls. The grandeur of her surroundings was overwhelming, a constant, oppressive reminder of her own insignificance. Every tapestry, every sculpted archway, every ethereal elven sentinel they passed seemed to mock her presence. This was a world of ancient beauty and grace, and she was a crude, mortal forgery at its heart. Theron did not speak. His profile was carved from stone, his thoughts locked away behind centuries of solitude and command. The tension radiating from him was a palpable thing, a silent storm of political calculation, and perhaps a sliver of personal uncertainty. He was a king who had just made the biggest wager of his impossibly long life, and she was the living, breathing proof of his desperation. Finally, they arrived before a set of towering moon-silver doors that led to the High King's personal chambers. Their chambers. The word felt like a lie on her tongue. 2 royal guards, their armor gleaming in the soft, magical light of the corridor, pulled the heavy doors open without a word. The space beyond was vast and shadowed, lit only by the cool, silver light of the stars filtering through a crystalline ceiling. Theron led her across the threshold, and the great doors swung shut behind them with a soft, final thud. The sound echoed in the silence, the definitive closing of a chapter, the turning of a lock. The public performance was over. They were alone now, trapped together in an opulent prison of their own making, the king and his counterfeit queen. The suffocating silence of the chamber pressed in on them, heavier and more intimate than the collective scorn of the council. Here, there were no roles to play, for an audience, no political theatre to maintain. There was only the stark reality of their arrangement, 2 strangers bound by a desperate lie, standing on opposite sides of a room that was meant to be a symbol of their union. He finally released her hand, the absence of his touch leaving her skin feeling strangely cold. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim, starlit gloom. The pact had been sealed with words and a public gesture, but here, in the vast, intimidating privacy of their shared quarters, the true, unspoken terms of their alliance would begin to unfold. It was not a wedding night. It was the first night of a long and dangerous war. The days that followed the ceremony bled into a strange and stilted routine, a life of luxurious imprisonment. Elara found herself adrift in a sea of silent servants and opulent empty rooms. She spent hours in the royal library, a place so vast it seemed to hold all the forgotten stories of the world. One afternoon, Theron found her there, not reading the ancient elven texts, but tracing the faded illustrations in a simple human book of fables, her finger lingering on a drawing of a cottage with a wisp of smoke curling from its chimney. He said nothing, merely watched from the shadows of a towering bookshelf. The sight of her, so small and mortal amidst the weight of his immortal legacy, was a quiet, unsettling counterpoint to the grand lie he had constructed. It was a flicker of genuine humanity in the sterile heart of his citadel, and it stirred something in him he had long thought dead. Their shared meals in the cavernous dining hall were exercises in suffocating silence, the space between them a chasm of unspoken words. Elara, accustomed to a life of scarcity, found it difficult to eat the elaborate, artfully arranged meals, her stomach churning with anxiety. One evening, she pushed away a plate of delicate, silver-leafed pastries, her appetite gone. Theron, noticing her discomfort, quietly dismissed the servants. In the sudden, profound quiet, he spoke, his voice low. "The food is not to your liking?" It was not a king's inquiry, but a simple, almost hesitant question. She shook her head, unable to explain the complex knot of guilt and fear that choked her. He did not press further, but a moment later a servant returned with a simple bowl of warm broth and a piece of dark, crusty bread, the kind of humble fare she remembered from her childhood. It was a small, silent Acknowledgement, a gesture of understanding that felt more intimate than any public declaration. Her presence at court was a constant, simmering source of conflict. The elven nobility, led by the imperious Lord Valerius, treated her with a chillingly polite disdain, their every word a veiled insult, their every glance a judgment. During a formal reception, Valerius's wife, Lady Lyra, approached Ilara, her smile as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "Your Grace must find our customs so quaint," she purred, her eyes flicking dismissively over Ilara's simple gown. "I imagine in the remote valley you hail from, such formalities are unnecessary." The surrounding nobles chuckled, a soft, cruel sound. Ilara felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She was a fraud, a commoner playing dress-up, and every one of them knew it. She could only offer a tight, silent nod, the weight of their collective scorn pressing down on her like a physical blow, reminding her that her crown was made of glass. The humiliation festered long after the reception ended. Ilara retreated to the solitude of her chambers, the cruel laughter of the court echoing in her ears. She stood before a tall, silver-framed mirror, seeing not a queen but a slave in a borrowed costume. The beautiful woman staring back at her was a stranger, a carefully crafted illusion that felt more fragile than ever. She wrapped her arms around her belly, a protective gesture that was pure instinct. This child, her child, was the only real thing in this world of gilded lies. The fear was a cold, coiling serpent in her gut. How could she protect this life from the vipers of the court when she couldn't even protect herself from their venomous words? She felt the walls of her new prison closing in, the silk and velvet just as suffocating as the rags and chains she had left behind. Later that night, Theron entered their chambers to find her standing by the window, silhouetted against the star-dusted sky. He had seen the incident with Lady Lyra, had noted the barely concealed triumph in Valerius's eyes. For a long moment he simply watched her, the rigid line of her back, a testament to her wounded pride. He was not a creature of comfort. The language of solace was foreign to him. Yet he crossed the room and stood beside her, his presence a solid, silent weight in the darkness. "Their words are wind," he said, his voice a low murmur. "They are afraid of what you represent. Change. A future. Do not grant them the power to wound you." He didn't offer pity or apology, but something far more valuable, a glimpse into the strategy of their shared war. He was treating her not as a fragile ward, but as a fellow soldier on a hostile battlefield. The council's opposition grew more overt. They requested a formal audience with Theron, their faces grim masks of disapproval. Lord Valerius acted as their spokesman, his voice smooth and respectful, but his words were laced with poison. "Your Majesty, the court has questions regarding the new Queen's lineage," he began, his icy gaze flicking toward the empty throne beside Theron's. "For an heir to be accepted, the purity of the bloodline is paramount. We have searched the ancient records for her family name, for any mention of this hidden valley you spoke of, and have found nothing. The people grow restless. They require proof, a sign that this union is blessed by the old magic, not a desperate act born of expediency." It was a direct challenge to Theron's authority, a demand that he justify his lie to their satisfaction, and they both knew he had no proof to give. The breaking point came during the midwinter feast, a grand assembly of all the noble houses of Eridor. Ilara sat beside Theron on the royal dais, the eyes of the entire court upon her. In a calculated move, Lord Valerius rose to offer a toast. After the requisite platitudes, he turned his gaze directly to Ilara. "To our new queen," he said, his voice ringing with false deference, whose miraculous arrival promises a future for our people. Perhaps she would honor us by reciting the ancient elven lay of stars, a simple rite any child of noble blood would know by heart. A hush fell over the hall. It was a trap, a public and inescapable test designed to expose her ignorance and prove her a fraud. All eyes were on her, waiting, hungry for her failure. The silence was a crushing weight, and in that moment Ilara felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Before Ilara could even form a response, Theron was on his feet. His movement was so swift and sudden that it sent a shockwave of silence through the hall. He did not raise his voice. Instead, it dropped to a tone of lethal, freezing calm that was more terrifying than any shout. "Lord Valerius," he said, his winter-grey eyes pinning the old elf in place, "the Queen will not be performing for your amusement like a tavern singer. Her blood and her worth are not matters for public debate. They are matters of my decree." He let the words hang in the air, a stark and brutal assertion of his power. "Let me be clear. Her voice is my voice. Her honor is my honor. Any who question her question me, and I do not tolerate being questioned." The threat was unspoken, but absolute, a promise of ruin that left no room for misunderstanding. The hall remained in a state of stunned, absolute silence. Lord Valerius, his face pale with a mixture of fury and shock, slowly lowered himself back into his seat. He had gambled and lost spectacularly. Theron remained standing for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles, a silent warning to every one of them. He then turned to Ilara, and in the privacy of that public moment, his eyes met hers. She saw not a king defending a political asset, but a man defending his chosen partner. He had not just shielded her. He had claimed her in front of their enemies, binding her to him with a declaration of loyalty that went far beyond their original pact. A tremor went through her, a dizzying, terrifying wave of gratitude, and something more, something she refused to name. She was no longer just his solution. She was his queen. That night, the suffocating space between them in their chambers seemed to shrink. The pretense had been stripped away by his public defense, replaced by a raw, unspoken truth. He found her on the balcony, the cold night air whipping strands of hair across her face. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. He simply inclined his head, his profile a stark, lonely silhouette against the moon. "They will not dare challenge you again," he stated, a simple fact. But the conversation drifted, away from politics and into something more personal. He spoke of the constellations, naming them with a familiarity born of centuries of watching. She, in turn, told him of the human stories tied to those same stars. For the first time, they were not a king and his pawn, but simply Theron and Ilara, two isolated souls sharing a moment of quiet connection beneath an infinite sky. The dangerous question bloomed in her heart. Were they really just pretending anymore? The fragile truce between them began to blossom into something more. One afternoon, he led her to a hidden conservatory at the top of the highest spire, a glass dome filled with plants that had survived the blight. Among them was a single flowering moon petal, its luminous silver blossom pulsing with a soft, gentle light. It was the last of its kind. He explained its magic, its connection to the life force of Eredor. As he spoke, his usual reserve softened, replaced by a reverence that was almost tender. He brushed his fingers against a petal, and then, his gaze meeting hers, he gently took her hand and guided it to touch the flower. The warmth that spread from the blossom up her arm was mirrored by the heat of his touch. It was a shared moment of wonder, a quiet offering of his world to hers, and it felt dangerously, beautifully real. Their newfound intimacy was shattered by the harsh intrusion of the outside world. A royal herald, his face grim, arrived bearing an urgent dispatch from the northern border. Theron broke the seal and read the parchment, the lines of his face hardening into granite. He looked at Ilara, his expression a mixture of cold fury and grim necessity. "The Lycan Alpha has heard of our union," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any of the warmth she had begun to see in him. "He does not believe it. He demands a formal presentation of the Queen and the royal heir at a summit on the border to be held within the month." The words struck Ilara like a physical blow. A public presentation, not just to his court, but to their most dangerous rivals. They would be putting her child, and their entire lie on display for a hostile Wolf King determined to see them fail. The fragile peace was over. The war had just begun. The news of the Lycan summit descended like a sheet of ice, freezing the fragile warmth that had begun to thaw the space between them. Theron immediately retreated, the vulnerable man who spoke of stars and dying flowers vanishing completely, replaced by the High King of Eridor, a being of cold calculation and ancient duty. He paced the strategium, a map of the borderlands spread before him like a battlefield, his words all of tactics, sightlines, and political fallout. He spoke of her as a strategic asset, her pregnancy a symbol to be leveraged. To Ilara, each dispassionate word was a physical blow, dismantling the delicate connection they had built. She was once again a piece in his game, a pawn being moved into the most dangerous square on the board, and her terror was not a factor in his equation. The king had returned, and in his shadow she felt the familiar crushing weight of her own insignificance. A chilling reminder that their intimacy had been nothing more than a fleeting illusion. Her silence was a coiled serpent, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low and shaking with a controlled fury that startled him more than any shriek would have. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked, her gaze locking with his across the vast, polished table. "I am not an asset. I am not a symbol. I am the woman carrying the child you have claimed, and you are marching us into a den of wolves who want nothing more than to see us both torn apart." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Theron's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his features before being suppressed by centuries of control. "Your feelings are a luxury," he countered, his voice harsh with the strain of his own fear. "Valerius is using this summit to consolidate his power. He whispers to the council that my human queen is a weakness, that I have forsaken our people. If we show a single crack in our unity, if the Lycan Alpha senses any deception, Valerius will have the support he needs to have you set aside and force my abdication. This is not just about our survival. It is about the survival of everything." The argument stripped them bare, tearing away the pretense of royalty and revealing two desperate people trapped in a cage of their own making. Pushed to the brink by her raw human pain, Theron finally broke. He stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes bleak with a despair that seemed to hollow him out from the inside. "There is a prophecy," he confessed, the words torn from him, a secret he had carried alone for centuries. "It speaks of the blight, foretelling that the elven line will end in silver and shadow, unless life is embraced from the soil of a forgotten hope." His gaze was a plea for understanding. "I believed it meant you, a human, from the dirt and stone of this kingdom, carrying life. It was a desperate interpretation, my only hope. But Valerius now claims to have found a descendant from a lost noble line, a forgotten hope of pure elven blood. He is not just challenging my marriage, he is challenging my very faith, painting me as a heretic king, leading us to ruin based on a flawed reading of our most sacred texts." His confession landed in the suffocating silence of the room, reordering her entire understanding of the man before her. The cold, calculating king was a facade, a shield for a being gambling the fate of his entire civilization on the cryptic words of a dying prophecy. The weight he carried was not just that of a crown, but of a sacred, terrifying burden. Her anger dissolved, washed away by a sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy. He had not chosen her as a mere convenience. He had chosen her as an act of desperate, singular faith. The moral dilemma of their lie shifted. It was no longer a simple deception for political gain. It was now a question of destiny. To continue this path was to stand with him against his entire world, to believe in his interpretation of hope, while to falter was to prove him a fool and damn them all. She saw the profound, crushing loneliness in his ancient eyes and realized that, in his own way, he was just as trapped and powerless as she had once been. The tension between them transformed from anger into a fragile, aching intimacy. He crossed the space that separated them, the great map of his kingdom seeming to shrink into insignificance. "When I saw you in that courtyard," he began, his voice a low, raw whisper that held the weariness of centuries, "it was the first time I had seen true life in this dying world. You have become more than a strategy, Elara. You are the only warmth in this cold, sterile citadel." It was the closest he had ever come to a declaration, a confession of a need that went far beyond airs and treaties. It was a truth that was both beautiful and terrifying. She lifted her hand, her fingers trembling as they hovered inches from his cheek, a silent offering of comfort. "Then we must not let them see the lie," she whispered back, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "We must make them believe it is the only truth we have." In that moment their pact was resealed, not with a royal decree, but with a shared, desperate vulnerability that was more binding than any law. The day of the summit dawned grey and cold, the wind howling across the desolate borderlands. Elven silk banners, embroidered with the silver tree of Eridor, snapped violently beside the crude fur and bone standards of the Lycan clans, a stark visual of two worlds colliding. Elara stood beside Theron, a queen in borrowed courage, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Before them stood the Lycan Alpha, a towering figure of scarred muscle and brutal power, his pack a sea of restless, predatory energy behind him. To their right, Lord Valerius and the Elven Council watched, their faces impassive masks that concealed their fervent hope for failure. The Alpha's yellow eyes, ancient and cunning, ignored Theron completely, fixing solely on Elara. He took a deliberate step forward, the tension in the air becoming a palpable, crushing force. He raised a hand for silence, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he prepared to issue the challenge that would either cement their reign or shatter their world into dust. The Lycan Alpha's voice was a low growl that cut through the wind, his yellow eyes fixed on Elara with predatory intensity. "A king's word is wind without proof," he snarled, his gaze sweeping contemptuously over the silent Elven Council. "My people do not trust treaties sealed with whispers and shadows. We require a sign." From a leather pouch at his belt, he produced a smooth, dark stone that seemed to drink the grey light from the sky. "This is the Heartstone, an ancient relic that glows only in the presence of a true, fated bond, a love powerful enough to forge a dynasty." He held it out, a clear and public challenge. "Let your queen touch it. If she is what you claim, if her child is the true heir of Eridor, the stone will show us. If not..." He let the threat hang in the air, a promise of violent, immediate consequences. Lord Valerius's lips curved into a faint, triumphant smile. The trap was sprung. Theron's entire being froze. He saw the endgame with blinding clarity. Valerius had conspired with the Lycans, feeding them the perfect weapon to dismantle his reign. Refusing the challenge would be an admission of guilt, proving his weakness and deceit to both factions. Accepting it would expose the lie in the most dramatic and final way possible, triggering the civil war he had fought so hard to prevent. For a paralyzing moment, the ancient king, the master strategist, saw no move left on the board. He could only see the utter terror in Elara's eyes, a reflection of his own failure. He had led her to this precipice, this public execution, and his crown, his power, his entire legacy offered no escape. He had gambled everything on a lie, and the time had come to pay with her life and his kingdom. The weight of 500 years of failure settled upon him, a crushing, final defeat. But before Theron could utter a single word of refusal, Elara took a step forward. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. She moved with a strange, serene grace, her hand no longer protectively on her belly, but held loosely at her side. She was not the terrified slave from the workyard or the trembling puppet from the ceremony. Her eyes met the Alpha's, not with defiance, but with a profound, weary acceptance. She had spent her entire life as a pawn in the games of powerful men, her fate decided by others. Now, faced with an impossible choice, she made her own. She would not wait for the axe to fall. She would walk to the block with her head held high. In choosing to face the dark, silent stone, she was reclaiming the one thing they could not take from her, the final say in her own story. Her quiet courage was a more powerful indictment of their cruelty than any royal decree. As her fingers brushed the cold surface of the stone, Theron's voice ripped. Through the silence, a sound of raw, unbridled agony and power. "Stop!" He strode to her side, not as a king, but as a man, and took her hand, pulling it away from the relic. He turned to face the stunned assembly, his winter-grey eyes blazing with a fire they had never seen. "You want proof? You want a sign?" he thundered, his voice echoing across the desolate plain. "The proof is not in a stone. It is in my heart." He looked down at Elara, his gaze softening with a vulnerability that shattered his regal facade. "This woman is not my queen by prophecy or by blood. She is my queen by choice. I love her. Her courage shames the ancient houses of my kingdom, and her honor is the only honor I now claim. The child she carries is the heir of Eredor because I name him so, because he will be raised by the strongest soul I have ever known." He turned back to his enemies, his voice dropping to a low, lethal declaration. "Our union is not a lie. It is a truth more powerful than any of your dying traditions." He then pulled Elara to him, his hands framing her face with a desperate tenderness, and kissed her. It was not a kiss for the court or the clans. It was a kiss that poured centuries of loneliness, regret, and a fierce, new-found hope into a single, shattering moment, and as their lips met, a gasp went through the crowd. The Heartstone, forgotten in the Alpha's hand, began to glow. It was not the cool, silver light of elven magic, but a deep, warm, golden radiance, pulsing with a life that seemed to push back the very blight from the land around them. The prophecy was not about a pure bloodline. The forgotten hope was love itself, a radical, defiant choice, powerful enough to heal a broken world. Months later, Queen Elara stood on a balcony overlooking a kingdom slowly returning to life. The sky above Eredor was a brilliant, unfamiliar blue, and the first green shoots were pushing through the once blighted soil. In her arms, she held her son, Lyran, whose tuft of dark hair was a stark, beautiful contrast to the silver head of his father, who stood beside them. Theron's hand rested on her back, his touch a constant, reassuring presence over the faint scar that was now just a story. The treaty with the Lycans held, forged not on a lie, but on the unshakable truth of their king's heart. He looked from his son to his wife, his ancient eyes filled with a peace that had eluded him for centuries. They were not fated, but they had forged their own destiny, proving that the strongest kingdoms are built not on blood, but on the courage to choose love against all odds. Their story became the new foundation of Eridor, a legend whispered for generations. If this journey from servitude to sovereignty touched your heart, please like, comment with your favorite moment, and subscribe to the channel for more epic tales of love and redemption.